Hi, this is Robert of MayflowerBookshop.com, and I'm here to share a free astrology lesson. How do you look at your astrology chart or somebody else's astrology chart? Now, in my book, Astrological Aspects, the Art, I make quite a case for the fact of this. What is the most important thing in your chart? The most important thing in your chart, and what could influence your whole life, is Pluto or Neptune or Uranus or Saturn conjunct, oppose, or square your sun, moon, ascending sign, and then maybe Mars, Venus, midheaven. Okay, let's go over that again. The most important thing in astrology is planets and aspects. Once you get planets and aspects down, that planets can be within 10 degrees, depending on which planet they are. Like the moon, in my book, Astrological Aspects, the Art, I give the moon as many degrees as it moves in a day, so it's often around 14-degree leeway, especially if the moon is applying to a conjunction, square, opposition. The trines and what they call the good aspects, the sextile and trine, 120-degree aspect, those are like visionary and seeing and comforting and aspects that make it a little easier to do whatever you're doing. The square, the conjunction, and the opposition are dynamic aspects that put you into the action or influence you, impel you to get into the action. So the most important aspects to astrology is this. You have to learn planets and aspects. There's a little aspectarian, a cardboard one that Mayflower sells, and you can put your planets on there. And it has a little pointer, it has a little pointer you point at it. And it tells you where the semi-square, the square, the triangle, all the harmonics of the hard or soft aspects. Hard aspects being, depending on the planets that are involved, the conjunction, opposition, and square, and minor versions of that. Like if you take a half of a square, you've got a 45-degree aspect. Some people see 40-degree aspect as a little energetic. And then you have like the trine of 100, you divide the circle in 3 and you have 120 degrees. And half of that is 60. Half of that is 15. I mean, you could play it that way too. So I don't want to confuse you, but if you have an astrology program, like we sell astrology programs at the Mayflower, like we sell the great program Solar Fire, for your laptop or your home computer. But if you have a cell phone, you can easily get free programs or very inexpensive programs such as Astro Celeste. And you can quickly see if you have a square, opposition, trine. And okay, so what's the most important thing in the planetary aspects? The most important thing is planets and aspects. And when you have Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, conjunct, oppose, or square, or some other hard aspect, your sun, moon, ascending sign, Mars, Venus, midheaven, maybe following that. And if you have trines or beautiful aspects with, let's say, Jupiter or Venus, come to help your tough aspect. You may have a square opposition that's trying and testing and puts you through trials and tribulations. They'll put you through certain sufferings to gain wisdom and knowledge and eventually learn to be free and wise. If you have like a trine of Venus or Jupiter or other planets on a trine to help your hard aspects, that's very helpful. Okay, so we got that. And then, so thus the most important thing after that, if not before, is what do the planets mean? And let's go through that really quickly. Although I go through it in my book, and I think you can't study enough planets and aspects. And you can get a little aspectarian, like I said, put all your planets, natal planets up there, and then you can look at an ephemeris and see where Uranus is now in Taurus, where Pluto is in Capricorn at the end of Capricorn. And you can point that pointer at it and see how it aspects your chart. And that's called transits. For quick directions or progressions, if you don't have a computer, you can take any of your planets and move them up 1 degree for how old you are. So if you're 30 years old, you move up the planet 30 degrees and see how it aspects your chart. And you can see subtle inner indications of the energetics that you're dealing with and wanting to express. But the most important thing are where are the planets now or at any particular time in the past or future, and how does it aspect your natal chart? By harmonizing with the trine. Trines can make you lazy. A lot of people say that trines are really good aspects, and they are. But they can make things too easy and comfortable and lazy. Whereas the square, a lot of people who are very, very successful have some trines, but they have these strong oppositions and squares and conjunctions. When it comes to conjunctions, like if you have Venus conjunct Jupiter, Moon, Venus, Jupiter, that's pretty cool. If you have Jupiter or Venus and the Moon in a pleasant aspect hitting against some of your tougher aspects, that can make you a dynamo. The most successful people in the world have overcome their tough aspects and redirected them toward the higher octave. It's another theory that I introduced years ago, that each of the planets and their aspects have a higher and lower octave. Thus, Pluto, roughly considered by common consensus to be the furthest out planet, although we could debate that Neptune is and Pluto is some kind of weird, satellite of Neptune that goes within its orbit every so many years. We could talk about that. But right now, I'd like to stick with Pluto as the furthest out planet, and that it might be considered like a nasty dwarf. The dwarf can tell you where the gold is and the power is, but it might come as a price. It might come at a price that if you become too materialistic and lose your ethical, universal compassion and your universal participatory understanding in mind of how everything's trying to work together. You can get in trouble. I think a lot of people get in trouble by being too materialistic or sense-bound 1 minute and then too spiritual the next minute. You can be a good spiritual where we see the harmony in all things and how everything wants to get along, and that there's some kind of unifying principle, some kind of oneness that permeates the diversity. There's some kind of space that holds us all together. And each of us is a unique expression of that oneness, a unique mindfulness of that oneness, a unique art and science of that oneness expression. The difficult aspects are when we're not conscious of our karma from previous life, or we're not conscious of the karma and necessity of the future. Sometimes things will happen to us that look difficult, that are really restructuring and reorchestrating us so that we can show up on time in the future to do some interesting, artistic, creative Dharma work or play or learning or sharing, gifting. And so the future pulls on us as much as the past. Almost all karma and suffering is thus either because of cause and effect from previous life or parents. All difficult experiences are karma from the past, or it's some kind of preparation or training and labor pain of a higher birth in the future, which really eventually it is. So when you come to Pluto, for instance, it can bestow wealth and power. You can triple your money that year with the right Pluto aspect, even if it's difficult. But Pluto also is associated with depression and psychodrama and frustrated emotions and frustrated desires or weird fears when it's coupled with Neptune in the wrong way, or other difficult aspects with Neptune. So Pluto has this, what I talk about in my astrology book, is that I talk about the three principles of the path in Tibetan Buddhism, and that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, Uranus being the determination to be free, or the need to be free at some point in your life. When you have strong Uranus aspects, you need to go to the next higher level, or have a breaking apart or sudden restructuring. Uranus-Saturn, for instance, is a destructuring and restructuring, an attempt to come out of chaos with an order and a sanity that would last, Saturn, some kind of structure. But Uranus is the strong impulse to go to the higher level and more intelligent level and to become free of structure. Uranus-Pluto is freedom from guilt and shame, but it's also struggling with what's right to do and where's the commitment and where's the freedom. That's always a challenge. How can we be free within the structure or framework of the artistic boundaries and ethical, social, cultural boundaries? How can we be free and not be deadened by repetition and boredom that comes from clinging? The Klingons are the bad guys in Star Trek, clinging to form. How can we avoid the Klingons, clinging attachment and wanting to replicate and compare? And so Pluto is psychotherapy and bankruptcy and the fall. But on the positive note, it's radical selflessness and compassion. It's compassion for all those who suffer. Compassion alone for all that suffers can help one to be selfless. One doesn't have to lose. A lot of suffering comes from the attachment of consciousness to form, addictions. We eat a certain way because we know we're going to feel a certain way. And even if it doesn't feel good, it felt like it did yesterday, so we have a false sense of continuum. So the pathologies are infinite. The positive virtues, like when you look at the planets as prajna paramitas in Tibetan lingo. I mean, you have in the Tibetan lingo Uranus, determination to be free, or shocks that put you through changes, the book of changes, But yet there's this unchanging truth of radical stillness and space and selflessness, and our spiritual potential to become enlightened someday or some lifetime is something that keeps showing up. There's a you that keeps looking again. So Uranus is this higher knowledge and this fast talking like I'm doing. Neptune is the beatific vision, seeing the good, true, and beautiful. Plato said that the good, true, and beautiful is the experience of God, not just an ideal. And that the real thing is within each one of us as a huge potential to be a God into becoming, like Jesus said, do you not know you're gods into becoming? Gods being a word borrowed from the Neoplatonists, meaning virtues in the becoming. Possibilities of artistic flowering, intelligent flowering, and going on. So Neptune is the social, cultural mores that are ever-changing. And Neptune is the ideal and the dream that we could all make it one day. Neptune is the beautiful experience, the higher love. It's like sometimes thought of as a higher octave of Venus, whereas Uranus is a higher octave of Mercury. In all the planets, our virtues or non-virtues in a higher and lower octave. When you read The Voice of the Silence, I go in the talk on Voice of the Silence, I go into the seven prajna paramitas, prajna being the grasp, the selfless grasp of the situation we're in, and the virtues that are possible to grow out of any situation. Patience, generosity, enthusiasm, concentration, meditation, and more. Kind of a prajna, simple grasp. People put it differently. The Tibetans will say there's 6 virtues. I'm saying that Blavatsky's right, that the 7th is prajna. But you have to listen to The Voice of the Silence talks I gave to get to that, and it's a well worth a mystical treatise on self-initiation. It's well worth it. And the planets become these virtues. Venus is patience, and that nothing ruffles you because you see kind of a divine love trying to find its way into the world. Mercury is showing up and being present. Mars is enthusiasm and the hero and the sword of cutting through when one understands selfless emptiness, or the passion for compassion to help others less fortunate. And Jupiter goes beyond Mars, which is like this hero and individual kind of assertiveness. Jupiter is like this community, social, cultural, family, identification with a group, and then we have Saturn as limits of growth, Jupiter's growth, and Santa Claus of the zodiac. You can look wherever Jupiter is and look at the next sign, and you'll see one of the secret ways you can make money and land your art. But that's another story about the secret of houses. So then we go to Saturn, which is this kind of like philosopher's stone and grounding, and the still mind that can see a little bit more when you look. And then we come to Uranus as the determination to be free or change or upgrade. And Neptune is this ideal that somehow we're all connected, and we're connected to the farthest. You can't trouble a flower without disturbing a star. You can't disturb a flower without the troubling of a star. I think that's a old poem thing. And that's the idea of Neptune, that we're all connected invisibly through the bloodstream of light, that everything is light and condensation of light, and that we're all eventually brothers and sisters, although we get afraid of our connections. And so that way Uranus is shock and change and shock and awe, and Neptune becomes, illusion and delusion. The illusion, the ignorance. Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto can be the ignorance of wrong view, not knowing the true nature of the self. Saturn is where we serve or find discipleship or discipline toward the strong ideals of Uranus and Neptune that we see. They all work together, really. All the planets. I used to have this friend who's passed into the spiritual worlds, and we'd talk a lot about these things in Hermetics, named Marjorie. And she used to say, I've never met a planet that I didn't like. And so all the planets are working toward our good. Like, there is no such thing really as bad karma, because all karma is trying to adjust things so that things can work and things can play and things can continue to move with a higher breath and a higher light and a higher love and a higher mind. And that would be, Saturn is the discipline or the sacrifice of something punky for something better. And Uranus is the insight and the fire and the electricity of Zeus, that is lightning bolt. Uranus is like the lightning bolt and the fire of Kundalini and intelligence. Intelligence, according to Tim Leary when he was visiting the bookstore, Mayflower Bookshop, said intelligence is the ultimate aphrodisiac. And that we needed the metaphysical books and spiritual books at Mayflower, such books, so that we'd have maps to the astral and spiritual planes. Now, if everybody knew that when they're drinking, or they're smoking, or they're taking medications or drugs, or they're kissing, or whatever they're doing, whatever high you have, nature, food, hugs, friends, whatever it is, that we need to have this spiritual knowledge. All the early astrologers studied Hermetics and Neoplatonism, and whether it's Addie or Dane Rudger or Mark Edmund Jones or all of them, Sassapordis, they all studied Robert Hand. They're deep students of esoteric spiritual philosophy, and they may have different angles, and they may change those angles at time to time. So we have like Neptune as being the delusion of the true nature of the self or other, and the true nature of reality. It's kind of like seeking oneness, but you have to honor each individual particle. We have to honor each little thing in our garden where it could take over the garden, but we're also trying to be attuned to the whole of the garden, tuned to the whole of humanity, while each individual member is important. It's an opportunity for learning or teaching or sharing or compassion. And then Pluto becomes the end of the line, like the traveling Wilburys sing about. Pluto's death and rebirth, and it's a turning inside out. Now, on a positive level, you can see people that have tough Pluto aspects, and they might be having a baby. They might be pulling the old foundation out and putting in a new foundation. They may be building a house. They may be returning to the garden and gardening and growing plants. They may be caretaking for others. The danger of Pluto is that you do too much for others and not enough for yourself, versus way too much for yourself and nothing for others. And Neptune is that we have these dreams that we might imagine music and singing, and we can imagine into things really big, but we need to get it in our hands. So weaving, bread making, cooking healthy food, like in the book that I used to start Om Cafe, the vegetarian cafe, that was around for a long time, that I started with Colleen Smiley. That we had Self-Healing Cookbook by Christine Turner. And when it comes to Pluto, I advise you to read The King, Warrior, Magician, Lover for the men's psychology. You got to be careful of that book, though. It's really tough on the goddess and the feminine. And then when you want to read the feminine, Women Who Run with the Wolves, how do you run with the anima, what animates you, the animal ally, and not end up an animal farm and getting bit by the animal appetite. And so that's Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Estes. I mean, nothing's perfect. Every book has its good merit. We're looking for something, I think, that will help us grow and know and more fully incarnate and more fully flower and free our higher creative intelligence. And so the planets are the virtues and non-virtues. They're the lords of karma. The planets were, the word planet, originally meant karma, lords of time. That in time, karma works out, and all karma is good because it fixes stuff and helps us learn. But Dharma, not karma, Dharma is the way to go for a better future. Aristotle talked about ethics as being different than morality. Morality is based on the past. Something happens and we learn our lesson and we don't do that again, or we fix it, or we make rules so you can't hurt other people or hurt yourself. We try to make these rules and laws. And that's part of the karma thing. But Dharma is more like ethics of Aristotle, that morality is based on the moral of the story, and the story might be over. But ethics are how to live for a better future. Dharma is how to live to heal the past and how to live for a better future. Dharma is all the spiritual teachings or experiences that bring you insight, wisdom, freedom from and freedom to. Those are different kinds of freedom of Uranus, And Neptune's like the dream. But are we just dreaming and it's not real and we have rude wake-ups when Saturn and Pluto come around? Or is Neptune something that we can learn to hear the music of the spheres and the music of plants and the music of the cycle of the seasons and the music of the earth changing season? There's a way to attune ourselves like a musical instrument. And that really does take all the planets. And so then Pluto becomes kind of like Saturn is kind of an outer commitment. Pluto's kind of an inner commitment. Neptune, you can feel crazy, but you can also feel divinely inspired. You learn the divine in each other, and that's the true divination. Now, there's astrologers that are ruthlessly scientific and computer-orientated, and they think that astrology is a mechanical thing, and you can learn to predict absolutely. And it's just not true, because as we grow, the more evolved you are, the more difficult it is to predict you. And that if you're not evolved, it's easy to predict. You can't predict when the bird's going to sing. You can't predict when your heart's going to sing. You can't predict when love's going to ring your door. You can't predict how you'll behave, that either you further it or mess it up. And so that's why meditation. And I think, again, you'll hear it in other talks. When you look at the astrology chart, the center of the chart is a point at the center or a circle with nothing in it. And that is representative of that magic mirror that your natal chart can be to show the energetics that one karmically and dharmically carry. And that point in the center is the self that could get enlightened, or is it the ego? Is it the dot of the ego that needs to get out of the way so we can learn new things? How can we be each other's brother and sister, and how can we help grow into the future, not be always waylaid by obstacles? Now, some obstacles are really good because it makes us stop and think and grow inwardly. So you have the idea of the sun as being the light of self, and a kind of a self-reference that somehow I can have a self that can come to know all things and can get enlightenment and can learn from mistakes. And wherever your sun is, if it's at the top part of your chart, it's more goal-oriented. Any planets at the top of the chart are goal-orientated and higher self-orientated. Planets at the bottom of the chart are more ancestry and hungry ghosts. And I think the top of the chart is the higher deva kingdoms and the attachment to the higher samsara. Whereas you might say that the bottom of the chart is the lower samsara attachment. Whereas the ascending sign area, like the 12th house is the unconscious, and the second house is doing something about it and making something worthy of whatever we learned in the first house. And the first house is the persona, but it's also the animal appetite. It's also it can be the animal realm. And I think that the 7th house is the other, and the 6th house is the unconscious others. Like the unconscious others are people we work with or we pass and while we shop, and we don't really know them as well. Whereas the 7th house is more cognitive. The 12th house is comforts that we're not so familiar with consciously, you might say. And what happens in the womb before we're born that influences our whole life. That whole 12th house is loaded with that. So the houses, instead of using the houses, I'm trying to present to you that there's 3 houses at the top, on the bottom, in the left and the right. And the right is the 6th house of unconscious people that we deal with in the world, and the 7th is more conscious. And then the 8th house is we find out if people were real or not, or if what we really learned from the experience that may connect to many lives, past, present, and future. And the 9th house is the unconscious, that we're driven for success, but at an unconscious level. So a lot of planets in that 9th house, some people would say, indicates your calling, but I'm saying that it's kind of unconscious, whereas the 10th house is a conscious calling, and most people don't really relate to the top and bottom of the chart unless they have a near-death experience or a major separation of consciousness from form that wakes us up. I mean, death, when somebody dies, we go to the wake because that's where we wake up, but through meditation and spiritual practice and discernment, distillation in the stillness of our experience and through the filter of these spiritual teachings of Theosophy, Tibetan Buddhism, Neoplatonism, Hermetics, Manly Haw, Yoga, Hinduism, Zen. I mean, there's so many, esoteric Christianity, the Jewish mystical, Chaldean, Babylonian Kabbalah, the Egyptian wisdom. I mean, there's so many places, ancient India, the Greeks, the Greek mythology, of the dynamic of the psyche and the soul as it weaves in and out of the body. There's so many things to learn from. And there's planets that represent all this. So I think I talked a little bit about the houses, and the 3rd house is the chit-chat of trying to have brothers and sisters or having brothers and sisters. And then the 4th house is the inner security, the inner trying to create a pearl in the fortitude and structure of our belly, our soul, our home, our bottom. And the 5th house is what comes out of making brothers and sisters and friends and chit-chatting and touching and all that kind of stuff. You end up in the fourth house of trying to live with them, either subtly or physically. You try to live with people and weave in another life, and you create babies, or you create art or poetry, or you create virtuous works out of that, and that is the fifth house. So the way that I'm presenting it in this kind of new form of Aquarian age astrology is that I'm not really using houses in the old way. I'm using them as 3 houses on the 4 cardinal points of the cross. And the circle and the cross is a huge symbol that goes way older. Way before Christianity, there was the Christos and the Christos and the Krishna with a C, and the Christos of the Greeks. This Christ principle of the spirit of the sun that's now a spark in our heart. Like long ago, there was this Christos, which is the trials and tribulations aspiring toward freedom and enlightenment and happiness that lasts. Finding happiness that lasts. Finding the true causes of happiness, which are working with the Dharma, freeing karma, like that. And so we have these, like this, the circle and the cross is spirit and matter. It's like the Tao cross of the Theosophical symbol, or the ancient Egyptian Hermetic, that looks kind of like a Venus symbol, but the Vesica Pisces, spirit and soul come together to sit on the cross of spirit and matter, the universal spirit and matter. So you have the interlaced triangles. So in the Kabbalistic way of thinking, we have a triangle, and below that a 6-pointed star, or interlaced triangles, and then we have the circle and the cross, and that's the Kabbalah. I'm talking about this in my new book on Hermetic Tarot, about to come out. But here I just want to say that Uranus, Neptune, Pluto are the fallen the fallen light ether, and the fallen magnetism. Uranus is electricity, and Neptune is magnetism on a positive and negative way. And Pluto is the life force that is in the blue of flowers coming up that are wild. So the higher triangle is Atma Buddha Manas, universal truth, universal love, and harmony. Mind, universal truth, love, and mindfulness, universal mind, the understanding of all things, the thinking in all things. And that's the higher triad of Uranus, the mind, Neptune, the universal compassion. Neptune is the ruler of Pisces. And Pluto, the life force that can rebirth you, heal you, or make things end so you can begin again. And then we have the interlaced triangles of Thoth, the Great Mother, and the 6 and 7 virtues. When you have the interlaced triangles, you have a point at the center. And that would be the Christos principle, the I am, the you and me that goes through the experience. There's something that goes through every experience. There's something that looks again to see if we can figure it out. There's some kind of self that is here to learn and strive for enlightenment. And that is the earth. The earth, the word earth spells heart. As you know, I like to share this a lot. And that the heart is the 4 chambers of these 4 seasons and the earth. There's a secret 5th chamber in a way of either the whole thing or something else. And that, like right now, as we enter the Aquarian age, we're entering into the 6th cultural epoch. Theosophy calls it a sub-race. We're all racing towards something. And it has nothing to do with external materialistic race or money or religion or belief, but it has to do with this 2160 years about, and we're going from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. Some people think that already happened in the late 1800s at the subtle etheric, because there is a physical body and an etheric solar energy, levity, grounding, rooting body, life force, prana body, the etheric, chi, prana, that subtle body that gives life to the chakras, whereas the astral body is attraction, repulsion, and desire and fear, and angels and highest aspirations and the war in heaven and bad guys and good guys and like and dislike and attraction and repulsion. That's all part of the astral body. All the planets have a physical and an etheric and an astral body, and they have like an ego. Like the planet has a planetary spirit or archangel that's like the ego of the planet, and the sun has one too. And part of our problem in the modern day is that we treat astrology like it's just a materialistic timekeeper that we can try to get whatever we desire and avoid our fears. It's weird like that, and that we live in this kind of materialistic world where we treat the earth as matter only, and we don't give it an etheric body and an astral body. All the gardens are the etheric body, and if we kill our etheric body, the physical body doesn't have life. That's what the astral body the starry astral body may animate us and help us to be attracted or repulsed from good or bad or whatever. And then the ego is what holds still for the whole of it. The ego is what holds still in awareness, conscious or unconscious, for the whole of it. The ego is the ego. There's a auric egg and a stillness that can hold everything and yet not be anything. It's a paradox. It's like having a self and no self, or having a moving and a non-moving. Our relationship to stillness and not moving. And that is the circle around the whole astrology chart, is the everything. And the point at the center is the stillness or the ego problem. The selflessness that can take it all in, or the obscuration and the block from seeing. How many lines can you draw from the point at the center to the circumference? Infinite. And so that's all the thinking and the feeling that we have is just about infinite. And but here we have this divine orchestration of planets. It's beautiful, beautiful situation, where the planets become the major chakras and orchestrators, like different levels of consciousness. I mean, you can take the planets and say it's physical, etheric, astral. And you can take all the planets and say the sun's the ego, and the Jupiter's the etheric, and Saturn's more the physical, and Mars is the astral, and then Mercury and Venus and the sun are us trying to be seated in our heart earth, with the moon full and new. When the new moon is closer to the sun and the full moon is further into the outer planets and the outer self of the physical, etheric, astral, which are representatives of our last 3 earths. We're in the fourth earth in Theosophical terminology and Rudolf Steiner anthroposophy and Neoplatonism and Hermetics and Pythagoras, yeah. So then we have like Venus and Mercury. Venus is the magic mirror of the internalization of experience and getting a feeling for truth and love. And Mercury is having a mind for it and a sense of presence. And the sun is the blessing and being blessed of everything. So there's a way to approach astrology on a spiritual level. Again, I try to do this in Astrological Aspects of the Art. And I need to rewrite that book and keep updating it, because we're always growing in new ways. But here in this sharing, in this talk I'm sharing now, I want to give you an insight into these planets. And you can see how the planets represent different states of consciousness and different levels, different chakras, different energetics. Mars is where we're assertive and aggressive or need to be, or we're overdoing it. And Jupiter's where we're trying to make money and friends and social life and be married and have kids. And Saturn is how we're going to hold a structure, hold on to form for a while. Uranus is we're going to keep upgrading. Neptune's we're going to keep learning how to love it all and feel connected and not feel like we're all alone without oars, or we're in some boat in the middle of the ocean with no oars and no motor and no sail, no rudder. Pluto this is it? Isn't there more? And there's a breath. From the stars to the sun, there's a breath. that goes through all the planets to the earth heart we have. We could say that the center of the chart is our heart center mind, reincarnating ego. And then we could say that the outer and inner planets are the outer and inner worlds that we're trying to balance. We're trying to do a juggling act. The astrology chart is like a magical mirror, a magical mandala. It's called astrology because most people operate on the astrology, the logic of the astro. I started to say it earlier. Saturn's the kind of psychology or scientific or control freak astrologer. Uranus is the ad lib, spontaneous, ever creative, high-tech computer or flashes of genius astrologer. Neptune is the smooth sailing, mystical, intuitive but don't know how I did that kind of astrologer. Pluto is the one who can help you through death and rebirth in really intense situations, I guess. All the planets, depending on the power of your planets, like you can have significant planets besides the outer planets on the inner planets. You could say that you could have Venus, Mars. You could have the Sun, ascending sign, Sun, Moon, ascending sign, Venus, Mars, in a prominent situation with those outer planets of Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, by square or trine. You could have the Sun, ascending sign, Moon, Venus, Mars, powerfully conjunct one of the four angles. If it's in the house before or behind the grand cross of the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th house, if it's the house before or after, it's got to be connected by aspects. It's got to be connected somehow by aspects. But if you have Sun, ascending sign, Sun, Moon, ascending sign, Venus, Mars, you have that on your midheaven, ascending sign, bottom of your chart, or 7th house. That's a very strong aspect that gives you a personal courage for whatever virtue or non-virtue is there. So this is your little beginning of the advanced astrology lesson. A lot of people have been asking me to share astrology. And so instead of just sharing my predictions, that like in the past, Mr. Biden, President Biden, has really tough aspects, and so he has to go to the higher octave. Otherwise, he's getting bushwhacked in a way and got really tough aspects, and so does the vice president. And believe it or not, just astrologically speaking, there's no projection here. Mr. Trump and the Florida governor have a lot of really good aspects during the next election, and I pointed this out to other major astrologers, and we're still pondering it and thinking what that means. So you can do predictive astrology, or you can, but nobody can really predict the future. You can see the tendencies, probabilities, and possibilities. And then we can try to educate ourselves with virtue mind training and these esoteric spiritual experiences. And we can educate ourselves through meditation and yoga and prayer. And we can try to get to the meaning and purpose of our own experience, the distillation of our experience in the stillness of meditation. And these teachings can bring us profound insights to how to work and play in this world so that everyone's bettered. Everyone's a little better for it. You're being here. So this is Robert Thibodeau of MayflowerBookshop.com. I'm the author of The Laws of Hermetic Wisdom, The Hermetic Dream. These are a lot of books that are out of print, actually. And the book that's in print still that I need to rewrite is Astrological Aspects, the Art. There's a new tarot book coming that talks a lot of how I talk now, integrating Tarot, Kabbalah, Tree of Life, Pythagoras, Hermetics, Neoplatonism, Theosophy, and Steiner, and this kind of self-realization attitude that we're here to discover who we are and how to make the world a little better place, and how to learn rather than burn and grow in new ways that reach and tingle, like spark the higher octave of everybody, as well as the roots and grounding and the happiness. So it's Robert Thibodeau of MayflowerBookshop.com. Bless your heart. Thank you for listening. Share. Think of sharing, donating books or whatever, and think of continuing to learn until the whole world's enlightened. May we be friends.